Dear colleagues of the National Contact Point of the Belgian European Migration Network, please.
Hello. Okay, the micro is on, or? Thank you. So I'll try to be very concise since we have a long day ahead. But so I'll focus briefly on three aspects: on applications, decisions and protection rate, as well. I'll also say a word about pending cases and backlog management. So for each of these three items, I will give an overview of Belgian trends, but also European trends and data. So for what concerns the first topic, applications, this is an annual evolution of the number of applications for international protection lodged in Belgium. So for the first 11 months of 2019, and we see that already we have about 25,500 applications being lodged within the first 11 months. So that is already more than in the entire year 2018. So we'll estimate we'll have about maybe 28,000, 27,500 applications by the end of the year. In particular, during the last 3 months, there was a significant rise in the number of applications. When we noticed that in October, for example, there were almost 3,000 applications lodged. Now in November, it's a bit less. It's about 2,450, but it's still significant more than it was in the first months of the year. Overall, there were about 15% subsequent or repeated applications and 85% first applications. However, we see that for some nationalities there are significant differences. For Iraq, Afghanistan, the number of repeated applications rise up to almost 40% or even more. As regards nationalities, this is currently the top 10 of nationalities who lodged an application in Belgium in 2019. These top 10 nationalities represent 60%, about 60% of the total number of applications lodged in 2019. And we still see that top 3 is Afghanistan, Syria, also Palestine, Iraq, and El Salvador also popped up in the top 5 due to a severe increase in the number of applications lodged in recent months. This was what it was for Belgium. Now at EU level, we see that on average, there are about 13,500 applications lodged per week. Now, in recent weeks, that has increased. So currently, we're about 17,000 during the past 2 weeks. About 17,000 applications lodged within a week, which corresponds with about 60,000 applications to be lodged per month in the EU+. So EU+ refers to the 28 EU member states plus Norway and Switzerland. So up till now, up till the 1st of December, we had 640,000 applications, which is 12% more compared to last year. And most applications in 2019 were lodged in France, Germany, Spain, Greece, and UK. Belgium ranks 7th after these 5 countries, as well as Italy. And but more, for example, than the Netherlands or Sweden. And taking into account the population size, it's mainly Greece, Cyprus, and Malta who take the large burden on asylum applications. At EU level, most important nationalities are Syria, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iraq, and Colombia. But there are huge differences amongst the EU countries. For example, for Italy, it's Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria. For France, Georgia and Albania are very important. So it's quite interesting to see how the composition of the asylum flow can differ widely from one member state to another member state. Now, the second aspect on decisions. So far, we took in Belgium 15,410 first instance decisions. So by the Belgium Asylum Board, the Office of the Commissioner General for Refugees and Stateless Persons. So leaving, not taking into account the decisions, the intermediate decisions, the decisions to declare an application as admissible, but the final decisions, the final first instance decisions, it refers to currently about 1/3 refugee status and about 6% subsidiary protection. And then we see a relatively high number of non-admissible decisions. That means that implies applications lodged by repeated applications, so a third or second application that was lodged. Also, applications lodged by people who have a protection status in another member state, and applications lodged by accompanied minors. So in cases where the application of the parents were refused, but the minors lodged an application in their own name. The manifestly unfounded applications refer to those lodged by residents from safe countries, who, for example, Albania, who could not manifest a clear fear. And the rest, the 29%, refers to so-called normal refusals. When linking this with the citizenships for Belgium, we see that the yellow bar refers to refugee status and the green one to subsidiary protection. We see that the protection rate is high for Syria, also for Turkey, for example, and we also see that there's a pretty large red bar for Afghanistan and Iraq, referring to the large number of subsequent applications as demonstrated before. For Albania, we see the blue bar referring to the manifestly unfounded asylum claims. This is, when talking about EU level, this is one of my favorite charts. This is a very interesting one. It's Eurostat data, but it's also a figure used by EASO in its annual report. It refers for the main. Well, in fact, it illustrates the lack of convergency, so divergency, if you want, between member states when it comes down to assessing international protection for specific countries of origin. So the 10 citizenships mentioned for which most decisions were taken within the EU plus in 2019. So for the first 3 quarters of 2019 are represented here. And the vertical axis refers to the recognition rate. While each bubble refers to a member state, the size of the bubble refers to the number of decisions taken by that member state. So to give a concrete example, for Afghanistan, most decisions were taken by Germany with an approximate average recognition rate of about 45%. So we can see I've placed the labels of the neighboring countries on the chart, and so we can see how Belgium represents to neighboring countries. And what's in particular remarkable is, for example, for Afghanistan, we see a very wide spread, ranging from countries who give almost 100% protection rate, and also countries who give 0% protection rate. Of course, this divergency also represents for Iran, for example, for Iraq, but also for Turkey and Venezuela. For the other countries, Albania, Georgia, or Syria, the bubbles are more clustered, or at the low end of the chart, or at the high end, for example, as is the case for Syria. So also, of course, you have some explanations. It's also worth mentioning that humanitarian statuses are included. So, for example, the very large bubble for Venezuela, it refers to, I checked it out in Eurostat, and it refers to 2,500 humanitarian statuses granted by Spain for applicants coming from Venezuela. So for Belgium, for example, a humanitarian status cannot be granted within the framework of an asylum procedure, so the comparison is not entirely valid, but it gives an indication. The very large majority of decisions refers to, of positive decisions, refers to EU harmonized protection status, refugee status, or subsidiary protection. So, and also, for example, it's not excluded. It's sometimes, you could say, it's an excuse used by member states, but it's possible, of course, that different profiles for the same nationality go to different member states, depending on the region. But also, for example, the bubble for Belgium, for Afghanistan and Iraq is also a consequence of the fact that we have a lot of subsequent applications for those 2 nationalities, which is not necessarily the case in other member states. Finally, a word on pending cases. recently, a monitoring of the entire asylum process was started. It's a process coordinated by our cabinet and involves representatives of the 4 instances involved. So the immigration office, who is responsible for the registration of the application and also for determine which country is or which member state is responsible for handling the application according to the Dublin regulation. And so the yellow bar refers to the backlog of the immigration office, the blue one to the backlog of the central asylum instance, the CGRS, and the green one refers to the backlog of the appeal board, the Council for Alien Law Litigation. So we see that in particular the backlog for the immigration office and the CGRS is increasing rapidly since mid 2016, I would say. So currently we have about 12,000 pending cases in the immigration office, but also within at the stage of the CGRS. The backlog at the appeal level, so is more or less constant. But what we had, so we saw an increase in the number of applications since mid 2018, and there was a lack of sufficient caseworkers within the immigration office and within the asylum board to deal with this increase due to the, for example, non-replacement of people who left the offices. This led, of course, to this increase in backlog and led to increased pressure on the reception system, but more on this later on in our next overview. So now to conclude, a word about the pending cases at EU level to see, well, in Belgium, so we have about 27,000 pending cases overall, so referring to first instance and appeal. So we still have a very large number of pending cases in Germany, although at first instance it's quite impressive how they managed to reduce their backlog. It's about 55,000. I see a representative from the BAMF here, so maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong. But there's still a significant backlog at appeal level. Well, the right figure is one of the figure on the right side is one of EASO and refers to first instance backlog only. And you see it remains more or less stable, but it's still significant with about 500,000 cases. So so it's still very much challenges ahead for all EU member states to deal with this backlog, I would say. So.
Good morning. I would like to give you an overview about the recent developments concerning the reception network. The Belgium reception network is managed by FedAsyl, which is the federal reception agency. And at the moment, FedAsyl has a capacity of almost 26,000 reception places. There are about 18,000 places in collective reception centers, and we have about 6,500 places in individual housing. The number of residents is about 25,300 at the moment. As you can see here, the inflow in the reception network has increased since the summer of 2018, with some downward fluctuations in the first half of 2019. And also, you cannot see this specifically on the slide, but also the influx of unaccompanied minors remains quite high. We had an influx of unaccompanied minors in October of 275 persons. As you can see, the evolution of the reception network shows a slightly different picture, with a reduction of the capacity until the beginning of 2019. So the reception network was still being reduced. At the moment, the inflow in the network increased. This was also the result of a third reduction plan that was decided upon by the government in March 2018, intending to close down another 6,500 almost reception places, both in collective centers and in individual reception places. and the aim was to attain the pre-crisis, between brackets, reception capacity from 2015. Concerning the profile of residents, there are no real changes in relation to last year. We can see that the people accommodated are still mainly families, like almost 51% of the residents, and single men, 37.5%. At the moment, almost 1,600 unaccompanied minors are accommodated in the reception network, and in total 66 are men and 34% are women. Concerning the nationality of our residents, we do have a small change, and it is that Afghan nationals and Palestinians changed places since the end of 2018, meaning that Palestinians are currently the largest group in our reception network, and Afghan nationals are on the third place. And now we come to the causes and measures of the saturation of the reception network. After the asylum crisis, 2015-2016, and with the EU-Turkey deal, there was a new political environment. There was the idea that inflow was more and more controllable and predictable, and it resulted in a diminished focus on contingency planning. The drop in applicants for international protection put in March a number of reduction plans, which already started in 2016. For example, emergency centers were closed down, the temporary contracts with private operators were not renewed, buildings that were on loan from the Ministry of Defense that we used as reception centers were returned, and the number of places in the still remaining reception centers were reduced. And also we had places in individual housing organized by NGOs, which was reduced or even totally closed down. As mentioned already at the beginning, we still were marked by a phase of closing down reception places via the reduction plan, which was decided upon in March 2018. And as I said, the aim was to reach a pre-crisis capacity, which was about 70,000 or a bit less than 70,000 reception places. But what do we see? From the summer of 2018 onwards, there's a gradually evolution. And as a result of the relative increase, which was not comparable with the situation in 2015, but also with the longer processing time, because Peter explained because of a lack of caseworkers, the occupancy rate in the most reception centers reached a critical level. You can see that since August 2018 onwards, the influx of applicants in the reception network has been greater than the outflux. This resulted in a positive in-out saldo, as you see on the second graph, of more than 900 people in October and November. This means that with the current inflow and the duration of stay in reception facilities, 900 additional reception places have to be created each month to be able to accommodate all applicants who are entitled to reception. As a result of this in-out balance, you just saw, the reception center slowly reached a maximum occupation because residents didn't leave the reception network on time. And on 13th of August 2019, the occupation rate in the network was 94%, with 96% in the collective centers. And as a reminder, you can see the bar at our threshold of 94%, and this means that we reach a critical situation in our reception network because the total capacity can never be used because of rooms that are temporarily unavailable or rooms with 5 beds that were given to families with 4 people. And now at the moment, the occupation rate in the entire network is 98%, and with a number of centers attaining more than 100% due to additional bedding, crisis beds, as we call it, that have been put in reception facilities. There have been a search for solutions to relieve the pressure on the reception network. Several measures. were taken. One of them was to eliminate the backlog in the treatment of applications of international protection by hiring additional caseworkers at the Immigration Office and the Office of the Commissioner General, as Peter just told you. Furthermore, the reduction plan approved in March 2018 was put on hold. And so the closure of 7 reception centers was postponed. Additionally, FELSI was allowed to increase the reception capacity of the center and to provide for or create 4,500 buffer places in existing reception centers. Furthermore, at the end of 2018, the government approved the opening of another 1,500 additional buffer places. What's more, the resettlement program was also put on hold because of saturation in the reception network. This was in the end of October, and so in 2018, only 888 resettled refugees arrived in Belgium instead of the pledge of 1,150 refugees. At the end of March, the government decided to reactivate the resettlement program, and we had arrivals in April and June of 233 Syrian resettled refugees. But then we had to decide in August to postpone the arrival of another 280 refugees because of the saturation, again, in the reception network. And so far, no further arrivals are confirmed for this year. Another measure that was taken was the opening on 3 December 2018 of the temporary arrival center. It was already a decision of the federal government in June 2017 to open an arrival center to rapidly respond to fluctuations in the influx of applicants for international protection and to have one single entry point for registration and allocation to reception facility and to make those processes more efficient. Because this center hasn't opened yet, it is foreseen for 2022. In the meanwhile, in December 2018, a temporary arrival center was opened. What's the situation right now? Well, because of saturation in the reception network, there's also a saturation in the arrival center, meaning that in the morning, when people are arriving to apply for asylum, if there are fewer than 130 people, they can stay in the temporary arrival center, and they will start with an arrival trajectory of 3 days comprising of a social and a medical intake, after which they normally have to go to a regular reception center in the second phase. When more than 130 people arrive, we are not able to capacitate them or accommodate them, so they have to go directly to a regular reception center. Given the current state in the reception center, it's difficult to match what was one of the meanings of the arrival center to screen an applicant and then to search for the best possible reception place. But because of the saturation, this is difficult, and they only take into account a minimum of criteria by allocating people to a second phase. Because also of the saturation, it is not always possible to transfer people to the second reception phase, meaning that they will stay in the temporary arrival center for more than a week. And the occupation rate yesterday in the arrival center was 112, almost 113%. So this means that the workload is very high in the center. There's a very strong high turnover, people moving, coming in and out, about 100 to 200 people, and after a weekend even more each day. So what was decided? That additional reception capacity was needed. Because the reception capacity that was already opened up in 2018 was not sufficient to accommodate all new applicants. So currently we have, as I already said, 26,000 asylum reception places, and that was only 21,000 in the beginning of the year. So we have added about 4,600 places in 11 months' time. How did we do it? Well, first of all, we increased the capacity in existing reception structures by adding beds. As you can see, those were not only added in infrastructure that was foreseen as rooms, but also in sport halls or in leisure rooms and locations that were meant for other activities than sleeping. We also opened up a lot of new centers. Only in 2019, FedAsyl has opened 10 new centers, one of which, the third one in Jambes, is managed by the Red Cross. And so we managed to add an additional capacity of 1,900 places. FedAsyl is still preparing to open other places, as the one in Ghent. You can see there's another one in Herbemont, and also reception centers managed by the Red Cross. 3 of them are bound to be open in the near future. It concerns care and nursing homes, campings, military holiday camps, formal hospitals, monasteries, hotels, everything we can find. Also office buildings, as long as they can, with some adjustments, be transformed into a reception facility. Furthermore, we had to install tents, or what we call mobile units, on the premises of existing reception centers. It's about 400 places. Each tent can accommodate 6 people. You can see if we have the possibility to put up tents in a shelter, we will do it, and otherwise they will be they are in open air. It's seen as a very temporary form of reception. And then in December, this month, we will also start to put containers. It was delayed because of the delivery of the containers, but they will accommodate in total 500 people, and they are also placed on the premises of existing reception centers. Well, it has not been an easy road for FedAsyl to find additional reception capacity. They have been looking feverishly since November 2018. And unlike the refugee crisis in 2015, FedAsyl is now more dependent on itself than before. In 2015, it was felt that there was a sense of urgency. The government made facilities of the Ministry of Defense available, and FedAsyl could also call on the local individual reception initiatives of the public social welfare centers and the communities. And there was also felt that there was a broad public support. But today, the response is limited. So we saw recently by a survey by the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities that 60% of the local authorities are not willing to open any more local reception initiatives, because they did in the past. They were empty for a while, they had to close down, and now we're asking to reopen them. And they feel that they don't want to be part of this yo-yo reception policy. We also see that the decline in public support. For example, there are a lot of demonstrations against the opening up of reception places. Like on social media, FedAsyl has put an advertisement to look for new buildings, and they had to take it offline just the next day because of the racist remarks that came in through Twitter and other forms of social media. I think we hit an all-time low in the history of the reception in our country on the night from 10 to 11 November, when fire was put in a reception place that was not opened yet in Bilze. It was a reception place that the Belgian Red Cross was preparing to transform in a reception place for 140 residents from the mid of December onwards. Since then, the Public Prosecutor's Office has opened investigations. There has been police supervision, even private surveillance firms have been hired to protect the contractor. There has been an augmented police supervision and camera security on other sites of reception centers. And it's also that the stream of racist and xenophobic acts and remarks and the fake news in social media weighs a lot on the staff of reception centers, but on the on the residents as well. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to be too negative. There are beacons of hope. Like after the arson, a lot of people came to the streets and marched for solidarity and a more tolerant society. I just quickly go, what are the next steps? The Federal Council of Ministers decided in November that they will put measures in place to support the asylum and reception instances. One of them is additional staff for the Office of the Commissioner General for Refugees and also for the Council for Alien Law Litigation, and hoping to make the procedures for international protection a lot shorter and also shorten up the duration of stay in the reception network. Another measure is that all federal services will have to support FedAsyl and other asylum services. It can be Ministry of Defense offering buildings. It can be SAILOR, the Federal Recruitment Bureau, helping up speeding recruitment procedures for the additional caseworkers needed at the asylum instances, for example. And we also have an approval to contract private actors. So we'll have 2 procurements that are out now, one for really quick, in the beginning of 2020, 3,500 extra places, and one in the future for another 1,200 reception places. And then there's one last thing I want to say, and that is, however, it remains a demand of FedAsyl for the next government to adopt an action plan once and for all that will enable the reception network to respond to fluctuation in the number of applicants for international protection more rapidly. In particular, they demand for a system of buffer places as was proposed in the years before. So because we're sure that, let's face it, it will not be the last crisis between brackets, and migration flows will continue to affect the asylum sector in the recent years. Thank you.
Dank u wel, Peter en Tine, voor deze heel volledige